What you have been sensing building beneath the surface has reached the moment when it can no longer be treated as something that is still approaching. The waiting has ended, the preparation has reached its limit, and what was once a feeling of anticipation has become the reality of this day. The Lion's Gate portal is open. Today is August 8th, 2026, and if you have been walking through this journey with me during these past several days, then you already know that this day carries a significance that goes far beyond simply appearing on a calendar. You have heard about its ancient Egyptian roots, about the return of the star Sirius to the sky, and about the numerological pattern that has surrounded this date for generations. But today asks you to shift your attention away from getting ready and toward recognizing what is actually happening while the moment is here. This is not another day to wonder whether the threshold is coming. You are standing inside the threshold now, and that changes the question completely. The question is no longer whether you should prepare yourself. The question is what this particular August 8th is revealing about the moment you are living through right now. There is an important distinction to understand before you move any further, because the Lion's Gate of 2026 is not being described by numerologists and astrologers as an ordinary repetition of something that happens every year. This year has been given the unusual designation of a triple 8 year. That description matters because the pattern behind it contains several layers of the same numerical symbolism arriving together, rather than one familiar pattern appearing by itself. Every Lion's Gate already carries the symbolism of 88 because it takes place on the 8th day of the 8th month. Within numerological tradition, the number 8 has long been connected with infinity, abundance, cycles, and the movement between effort and reward. It can represent the continuing motion of something that does not simply begin and end, but moves through phases, returns, transforms, and begins again. So even the ordinary repetition of 8 on the 8th day of the 8th month has traditionally been viewed as meaningful. But 2026 adds another layer to that pattern. When the complete date is reduced through numerological calculation, the digits of August 8th, 2026 are added together. 8 plus 8 plus 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 6 gives 26. Then 26 is reduced again by adding 2 plus 6, producing 8. That means the number 8 appears through 3 separate expressions within the same date. There is the 8 belonging to the month, there is the 8 belonging to the day, and there is the 8 reached through the reduction of the entire year and date. This is why numerologists describe the pattern as an 888 alignment. Within that tradition, repeated numerical resonance is often interpreted as amplification. The symbolism is not viewed as merely appearing twice and then stopping. Instead, 3 expressions of the same number are understood as creating a stronger concentration of that particular symbolic theme. Imagine hearing one note and then hearing that same note echoed from several directions at once. The individual sound has not changed, but your experience of it has. That is the way this pattern is often interpreted. It is not simply another number on the calendar. It is a repeated symbolic signal appearing through multiple layers of the same date. And there is another reason this deserves your attention. The ordinary 88 pattern occurs every year because Lion's Gate always falls on the 8th day of the 8th month. But the additional alignment created when the complete date reduces back to 8 depends entirely on the numerical sequence of the specific year. It cannot be assumed to happen every year. It requires the digits of the year and the date to produce the necessary result. Because of that, numerologists consider this kind of triple alignment considerably less common than the standard 88 pattern. Some numerologists estimate that this type of convergence appears only a handful of times across an entire lifetime. Whether you personally interpret that numerologically, spiritually, symbolically, or simply as an unusual mathematical pattern, the distinction remains important. This is not the same configuration that repeats automatically each year. It depends on a particular combination of numbers coming together at a particular point in time. Looking back, numerologists have identified a small number of similarly aligned years within recent memory, and those years were treated with particular reverence by spiritual communities during their respective moments. There is no simple repeating schedule that allows you to count forward by a fixed number of years and know exactly when the next one will appear. The alignment depends on the arithmetic contained within each individual year. That unpredictability is part of what gives the pattern its symbolic appeal. It cannot simply be placed on a calendar decades in advance through a repeating interval. It emerges when the numbers happen to align. And that is precisely why 2026 is being treated as an uncommon convergence rather than simply another routine. Lionsgate. Yet numerology is only one layer of what makes this particular moment stand apart. The sky itself is carrying several additional astrological themes that many astrologers consider important. Earlier this summer, Jupiter moved into Leo, and it is expected to remain there for roughly a year. Jupiter is traditionally associated with expansion, growth, opportunity, luck, and a broadening of whatever area of life it touches. Its movement through Leo is especially notable because Leo's overlaps directly with the period in which the Lion's Gate occurs. The symbolism therefore meets the astrology in a particularly visible way. Jupiter in Leo is commonly associated with greater confidence, stronger creative expression, increased visibility, and a willingness to occupy space without constantly asking for permission to exist within it. Think about what that can stir inside a person. If you have spent a long time minimizing yourself, waiting for approval, questioning whether your ideas are valuable, or keeping your natural creativity hidden because you are afraid of being judged, this symbolism can feel deeply personal. It does not mean that every person suddenly becomes fearless. It means the themes of confidence, expression, creativity, and visibility are being emphasized during a period when the Lion's Gate is already drawing attention towards similar ideas. And then there is another major shift taking place in the background. Just weeks ago, the Moon's North Node moved into Aquarius, while the South Node moved into Leo, beginning a new 18-month cycle that will continue unfolding well into 2028. This nodal transition changes the larger story because the South Node is traditionally associated with patterns that are being released, completed, or left behind. With the South Node now in Leo, that symbolism directly touches the sign at the center of the Lion's Gate. At the same time, the North Node in Aquarius points toward collective awakening, innovation, community, and broader forms of social or human development. This creates a tension between what has been familiar and what is asking to emerge. It can feel psychologically like standing between two versions of yourself. One version knows how to survive through old patterns, old identities, old ways of receiving attention, and old definitions of personal importance. Another part of you senses that something larger is asking you to participate differently, to think beyond yourself, to contribute, to connect, and to recognize your place within a wider collective movement. That tension can be uncomfortable because growth does not always feel like excitement. Sometimes it feels like realizing that an identity you once needed is no longer large enough to contain who you are becoming. The timing becomes even more significant because this Lion's Gate is arriving while an eclipse season is already underway. In only 4 days, on August 12th, a total solar eclipse in Leo will follow. That places this portal within an unusually concentrated period of astrological activity. The symbolism of Leo, the nodal movement, the Lion's Gate, and the approaching eclipse are all occupying the same narrow stretch of time. When you look at your own life through that lens, you may begin noticing something that you had previously overlooked. Perhaps there is a decision you have postponed because you are waiting for certainty. Perhaps there is a relationship dynamic that keeps repeating even though part of you already knows it has reached its limit. Perhaps there is a creative desire that continues returning, no matter how many times you push it aside. Or perhaps the deepest change is quieter than all of that. Maybe you are simply beginning to recognize that the person you have been trying to become is not the same person you were several years ago. The astrology does not remove your responsibility for those choices, but within these traditions, it can provide a symbolic mirror through which those choices become easier to see. There is another planetary influence that deserves attention because it prevents this entire moment from being interpreted only as excitement, expansion, and immediate manifestation. Saturn continues its long transit through the sky this year. Saturn is traditionally associated with structure, discipline, responsibility, boundaries, and long-term consequences. Its presence introduces an entirely different psychological lesson. Inspiration may arrive quickly, but building something real requires consistency. A powerful realization can change the way you see your life in a single moment. But changing the life itself usually requires repeated action after the emotional intensity has passed. This is where the symbolism of Jupiter and Saturn becomes especially meaningful. Jupiter can represent expansion, possibility, confidence, and growth, while Saturn reminds you that growth needs a structure capable of holding it. Without structure, inspiration can disappear. Without discipline, a powerful intention can become another temporary emotional high. Without follow-through, even a meaningful realization can fade when ordinary life returns. So, if something feels unusually clear to you today, do not assume that clarity alone is the transformation. The deeper transformation may begin with what you choose to do after the clarity arrives. That is the psychological difference between feeling inspired and actually changing direction. One gives you a powerful emotional experience. The other asks you to build a different pattern through your choices. This balance between expansion and responsibility is one reason many spiritual traditions view grounded action as essential when working with powerful symbolic moments. The goal is not simply to feel something extraordinary today and then return to the same habits tomorrow. The deeper invitation is to recognize what the experience reveals and then give that realization a stable place within your life. This is also why the convergence of these different elements is being treated as more meaningful by astrologers and numerologists than any single factor would be on its own. Jupiter moving through Leo carries one message. The nodal shift carries another. The approaching eclipse carries another. The numerical 888 alignment carries another. Saturn contributes yet another layer through its emphasis on discipline and consequence. Each element can be considered individually, but the reason this period attracts so much attention is that these themes are arriving within the same narrow window. Picture an orchestra preparing for one decisive measure. One instrument alone can create a beautiful sound, but when several instruments reach their strongest notes at the same moment, the entire experience changes. The individual sounds remain distinct, yet their interaction creates a larger impression. That is the way many spiritual practitioners understand this convergence. It is not necessarily that one event magically creates everything else. It is that several symbolic systems are pointing toward overlapping themes at approximately the same time, and that overlap can make certain questions in your own life feel impossible to ignore. You may find yourself asking what you are ready to release, what you are no longer willing to pretend about, where you have been hiding your own potential, or which part of your identity has become more comfortable than truthful. You may also notice the opposite. You may feel an unexpected desire to create, to be seen, to express yourself, to take your place, or to stop waiting for someone else to validate what you already know inside. These reactions do not have to be dramatic to be meaningful. Sometimes awakening arrives as a quiet recognition that something no longer fits. Sometimes the turning point is not an external event at all. Sometimes it is the instant when you finally stop negotiating with a truth you have known for a long time. That is where the symbolism of this particular Lion's Gate becomes more personal. The numbers may describe the pattern, the planets may describe the atmosphere, the eclipse may mark the surrounding period, but your choices determine what those symbols mean within your own story. The significance is not simply that three expressions of 8 appear together, or that Jupiter is in Leo, or that the nodes have shifted, or that a total solar eclipse in Leo is approaching. The significance comes from the way these themes cause you to look at yourself differently. A portal can be described as a threshold, but a threshold only matters when someone decides to cross it. So as you stand in this August 8th moment, notice what has been demanding your attention lately. Notice the feeling that keeps returning. Notice the truth that becomes harder to dismiss when everything becomes quiet. Notice the part of your life where expansion is calling for courage, and the part where Saturn is reminding you that courage must eventually become commitment. This is why 2026 is being viewed as more than another repetition of the annual Lion's Gate. The convergence itself is the central story. The unusual numerical alignment, the movement of Jupiter through Leo, the new nodal cycle with the South Node in Leo and the North Node in Aquarius, the eclipse season approaching its total solar eclipse in Leo on August 12th, and the steady presence of Saturn are all forming one concentrated symbolic landscape. Whether you experience that landscape as spiritual guidance, psychological reflection, or simply a meaningful framework for examining your life, the invitation is the same. Pay attention to what becomes visible when you stop rushing past yourself. Because now that the reason for this year's unusual wait has been established, the next question becomes even more important. If the gate is already open, what does that actually feel like in your everyday life? And how might you recognize what this moment is asking you to understand? Spiritually, many traditions describe today as a moment of heightened accessibility, a window during which the usual boundaries between ordinary consciousness and deeper spiritual awareness grow unusually thin. This doesn't mean something dramatic is guaranteed to happen to you today. It means rather that if you choose to engage with intention, reflection, or manifestation today, many traditions suggest that engagement tends to carry more weight, more clarity, more resonance than it might on an ordinary day. Practically, this often translates into a felt sense of significance around choices made today, intentions set with genuine sincerity, old patterns consciously released rather than simply endured, moments of gratitude offered with full presence rather than distracted habit. None of this requires elaborate ritual to be meaningful. The gate being open is less about external permission and more about internal readiness. Your own willingness to meet today with genuine attention rather than letting it pass exactly like any other Tuesday on the calendar. If you've been building toward this moment over these past several days, following the signs, receiving the messages, understanding what to avoid, today is where all of that preparation finally meets its moment. Not as ending, but as arrival. There's a particular kind of relief many people describe, feeling once a long-anticipated threshold finally arrives, distinct from the anticipation that preceded it. The uncertainty of what will this day bring resolves simply into this day is here, and I get to decide how I meet it. If you spent the last several days feeling the weight of anticipation building, today offers a natural release valve for that accumulated energy, an invitation to stop anticipating and simply begin engaging. However that engagement looks for you. Even as we speak in symbolic and energetic terms, it's worth returning briefly to the concrete astronomical reality underlying all of this today. The sun sits in its own home sign of Leo, exactly as it has every August 8th for as long as astrology has been practiced. Sirius, the brightest star visible in Earth's night sky after our own sun, continues its annual heliacal rising, appearing near the sun's position in a pattern ancient Egyptian priests once organized entire temple alignments around. This year, the moon adds its own layer to today's configuration, sitting in a waning crescent phase within Gemini, just days before the upcoming new moon in Leo arrives alongside the eclipse on August 12th. Many astrologers note this particular lunar placement as supportive of open, honest conversation about hopes and aspirations, themes that align naturally with the broader intentions many bring to this date. None of this requires you to track planetary movements yourself to benefit from understanding it, but knowing that real, measurable astronomical events underlie the symbolic weight so many traditions place on this date offers a kind of grounding, a reminder that the significance millions feel today isn't built purely on belief alone, but rests on a foundation of genuine celestial alignment, repeating with remarkable consistency year after year. For as long as human beings have thought to look up and notice, today you stand somewhere. Millions of others also stand at the threshold of a date carrying centuries of accumulated meaning. Arriving this particular year with a rarity numerologists don't see often layered alongside astronomical alignments. Astrologers describe as unusually significant even among Lions Gates themselves. Whatever you choose to do with today, whatever intention you set, whatever you consciously release, whatever quiet gratitude you offer, know that you're not moving through this moment alone. You're joining millions of people across the world, each meeting this same open gate in their own way, each carrying their own hopes forward into whatever this 888 year continues to unfold. Across everything we've discussed so far, one theme keeps surfacing. Today isn't simply a day to observe passively, where the days leading up to this threshold called for preparation, reflection, and release. Today itself carries a different invitation, one oriented far more toward conscious, intentional action. This distinction matters. Many spiritual traditions describe the Lion's Gate specifically as a manifestation window, a day when energy set into motion through deliberate action tends to carry unusual momentum forward into the months ahead. This doesn't mean today functions as some kind of guaranteed wish-granting mechanism. It means rather that many practitioners have found genuine value in treating today as a day for concrete symbolic gestures, small acts that externalize intention rather than leaving it purely internal. What follows are several practices many spiritual communities turn to, specifically on this date, offered here not as rigid instruction, but as options worth considering, adapting, or simply understanding whether or not you choose to practice them yourself today. One of the most commonly practiced rituals associated with this exact date involves creating what many call an 88 manifestation list, a simple written practice built directly around today's numerological significance. The practice itself is straightforward. Many traditions suggest writing down 8 specific things you wish to manifest or invite into your life over the coming months. Choosing this number deliberately to align with today's numerological resonance, some practitioners extend this further, writing 8 things they're grateful for alongside the 8 things they're hoping to manifest, balancing forward intention with present appreciation. What matters most in this practice isn't rigid adherence to any particular format, but rather the act of genuine, specific articulation. Vague wishes tend to carry less clarity than concrete, honestly considered intentions. Rather than writing simply more abundance, many practitioners suggest naming exactly what abundance would look like in your specific life. Whether that's a particular opportunity, a specific shift in a relationship, or a concrete change in daily circumstance. Once written, this list is often kept somewhere visible. A journal, a note on a mirror, a private document revisited periodically throughout the year ahead. The physical act of writing itself, many traditions suggest, carries its own energetic significance, transforming abstract hope into something more concrete and deliberately claim. Some practitioners choose to revisit this exact list on future significant dates throughout the year, such as the upcoming eclipse in just a few days or the next Lionsgate a full year from now, tracking which intentions have taken root and which may need renewed attention or gentle revision. This kind of periodic return transforms what might otherwise be a single isolated exercise into an ongoing practice of accountability and reflection, allowing you to genuinely observe how your own intentions evolve and manifest across an entire year rather than expecting instant immediate results within these first 24 hours alone. A second practice many turn to on this date involves fire, specifically a single candle lit with deliberate intention. Candle rituals appear across countless spiritual traditions throughout history. Fire, long associated with transformation, illumination, and the release of what no longer serves. For this particular practice, many suggest lighting a single candle in a quiet space, taking a moment before lighting it to clearly name either aloud or silently what you're hoping to release and what you're hoping to invite forward. As the candle burns, some traditions suggest sitting with it briefly, watching the flame, allowing whatever thoughts or emotions arise to simply move through you without forcing them in any particular direction. Some practitioners write a brief note, naming what they're releasing and safely burn it, using the candle's flame, watching the paper transform, a physical representation of release taking place before them. This should always be done with appropriate safety precautions, using a fireproof container and never leaving flame unattended. The symbolism here is fairly direct. Fire transforms matter from one state into another, much as we hope our own intentions might transform circumstances in our lives. Today's particular numerological weight, many traditions suggest, adds additional resonance to this already ancient practice. Some choose to perform this candle ritual alone, in complete quiet, while others prefer sharing the moment with a partner, family member, or small group of trusted friends, each person lighting their own candle and briefly naming their own intention aloud within the shared space. Neither approach carries more validity than the other. Solitary practice offers uninterrupted private reflection, while shared practice adds a layer of community witness and mutual support, both of which different spiritual traditions have valued across different cultural contexts. Choose whichever approach genuinely resonates with your own temperament and circumstances today. A third practice, somewhat less commonly discussed but meaningfully connected to this date's themes, involves working with a mirror specifically as a tool for self-recognition and affirmation. This practice typically involves standing before a mirror, ideally in a quiet, undisturbed moment, and speaking directly to your own reflection, not with self-criticism, but with genuine affirmation. Many practitioners suggest naming specific qualities you're choosing to embody moving forward, or specific outcomes you're claiming for yourself. Spoken directly and without hesitation clears throat. This practice draws on the deeper Leo season energy underlying the entire Lion's Gate period. Themes of authentic self-expression, courage, and the willingness to be fully seen, including by yourself. For many people, speaking directly and sincerely to their own reflection proves surprisingly difficult, uncovering discomfort around self-worth or self-belief that might otherwise remain unexamined. If this practice feels uncomfortable, that discomfort itself is worth noting rather than avoiding entirely. Consider starting small, a single sincere affirmation rather than attempting an elaborate ritual immediately. The goal isn't performance or perfection, but genuine, however brief, connection with your own reflection met with honesty rather than habitual self-criticism. Beyond these three broader practices, some practitioners choose to work more specifically with today's numerological themes, particularly relevant if your own birth date carries a connection to the number 8. If your birth date, when reduced numerologically, resolves to the number 8, or if the number 8 appears prominently in your personal numerology chart through your life path number, some traditions suggest today carries particular resonance for you personally, beyond its general significance for everyone. This doesn't mean today matters less for those without this connection, simply that those with a personal numerological tie to 8 might notice this day's themes surfacing with particular clarity or intensity. Life path number 8 in numerological tradition is associated with confidence, personal power, resilience, and material achievement, balanced against a genuine need to remain connected to deeper purpose rather than purely surface-level success. If this describes your own numerological profile, today might be an especially meaningful moment to reflect specifically on how you're balancing ambition with authentic values, power with genuine integrity. Whether or not 8 features prominently in your own numerology, everyone can benefit from reflecting on the number's broader themes today. The flow between effort and reward, the infinite loop of giving and receiving, and the balance between material and spiritual abundance this date is represented across so many centuries and traditions. Even for those whose personal numerology centers on entirely different numbers today, still offers meaningful reflection through the lens of your own life path. Someone whose life path centers on the number 2 associated with partnership and diplomacy might use today to reflect specifically on balance within relationships. Someone guided by the number 7 associated with introspection and spiritual seeking might find today particularly suited to quiet inward reflection rather than outward manifestation ritual. The number 8's themes color today's overall energy, but your own personal numerology can still shape exactly how you choose to engage with that broader energy in a way that feels authentic to your specific path. Amid all this discussion of ritual and manifestation, it's worth naming clearly what today isn't, if only to prevent unrealistic expectation from overshadowing genuine, meaningful engagement with this threshold. Today is not a guarantee that everything you wish for will materialize simply because you wished for it on this particular date. No spiritual tradition examined honestly has ever promised that. What these practices offer instead is a structured opportunity for genuine reflection, intentional clarity, and deliberate action. Qualities that tend to support meaningful change, regardless of which specific day they occur on, but which this date's accumulated significance makes easier to access with focused attention. Today also isn't a day that requires elaborate practice to hold meaning. If none of these specific rituals resonate with you, a single quiet moment of genuine reflection, however brief, however simple, carries just as much validity as any more elaborate ceremony. The significance of this date has never rested on complexity of practice, but on sincerity of intention. Whatever you choose to do with today, whether it's a full manifestation ritual or simply a single mindful breath taken with awareness of the date's significance, trust that your own genuine engagement matters more than matching anyone else's version of how this day should be honored. As today continues to unfold, it's worth remembering that its significance doesn't end abruptly at midnight. Many traditions describe the Lion's Gate as a period, rather than a single isolated day with energy continuing to build through today and gently settling in the days that follow, particularly as we move toward the solar eclipse arriving just 4 days from now. Whatever intentions you set today, Whatever you release, whatever you consciously choose to welcome forward, consider how you might continue honoring that choice in the coming days and weeks rather than treating today as a single isolated event disconnected from ordinary life once it passes. Integration, as we've discussed throughout this series, is where lasting significance actually takes root far more than any single day's ritual alone. This kind of patience runs somewhat against the grain of how quickly modern life often expects results. But manifestation across nearly every tradition that discusses it seriously has always been described as a process rather than an instant transaction. Seeds planted today, whether through a written list, a spoken affirmation, or a simple quiet intention, typically require time, continued attention, and often ordinary effort in the physical world before they visibly take root. Today plants something. What grows from it depends significantly on what you continue doing in the days and weeks that follow, not on the ritual alone. We've walked together through why this particular Lion's Gate carries a weight beyond its ordinary yearly return. The 888 numerology, stacking three expressions of the same number into a single date. Jupiter's expansive presence in Leo, the nodes beginning an entirely new 18-month cycle, and an eclipse season already gathering momentum just days ahead. Threads like these rarely converge this tightly, and understanding why they matter has been the purpose of everything we've explored so far today. But understanding alone was never the final destination. Today asks something more of you than intellectual appreciation for rare astronomical timing. It asks for genuine personal engagement, however that engagement looks for you specifically. Whether that meant writing an 88 manifestation list, lighting a single candle with intention, speaking honestly to your own reflection, or simply pausing for one quiet moment of awareness amid an otherwise ordinary day. What matters is that you met this threshold with some measure of presence rather than letting its rarity pass entirely unnoticed. It's worth naming something honestly here, because it's easy for language like rarer than any other year to create quiet pressure. A sense that today somehow demands more from you than an ordinary Lion's Gate, that anything less than a perfectly executed ritual represents a missed opportunity you'll regret. This isn't the spirit in which rarity should be received. A year's numerological or astronomical rarity doesn't obligate you to perform readiness or manufacture significance you don't genuinely feel. It simply means that if you do feel called toward intentional engagement today, the accumulated weight of this particular convergence may support that engagement more powerfully than an ordinary year might. Rarity is an invitation, not a requirement, and treating it as pressure tends to work against the very receptivity these traditions describe as most valuable. There's a meaningful difference between feeling drawn toward today's significance and feeling obligated by it, and that difference is worth checking in with honestly. If today has felt like one more thing to get right, one more standard to meet that pressure likely isn't coming from the threshold itself, but from an internal pattern worth noticing gently, perhaps even releasing alongside whatever else you've chosen to release today. If today has felt quiet for you, ordinary even, despite everything we've discussed about its rarity, that's entirely valid. Not everyone experiences significant dates with equal intensity, and that variation has never been considered a flaw in how these traditions actually work. Trust your own experience over any external description of how today should feel. It's worth stepping back in these final moments together to consider today within its larger context. This Lion's Gate doesn't stand alone. It arrives within a nodal cycle that began just weeks ago and will continue unfolding for the next 18 months within a Jupiter transit through Leo that will continue shaping the coming year, and within an eclipse season that will continue building toward its next major moment in just 4 days. Today, in other words, is a single significant point within a much longer unfolding story, not an isolated event disconnected from everything before or after it. Whatever shifts today, whatever clarity arrives, whatever intentions take root, these threads will continue developing long after this particular date fades into the recent past, shaped by choices made not only today, but across the weeks and months that follow. This context matters because it offers a gentler way of understanding today's significance. You don't need everything to resolve or transform within these 24 hours for today to have mattered. You simply need to have met it with genuine presence, trusting that whatever you've planted today will continue developing within this larger cycle already in motion around you. Somewhere in this exact moment, millions of people across the world are meeting this same date, this same rare convergence, each in their own way, each carrying their own hopes, their own intentions, their own quiet moments of reflection into whatever comes next. You are not alone in whatever you felt today, whatever you've released, whatever you've chosen to welcome forward. This shared global moment of collective attention is in many ways part of what continues giving this date its accumulated significance across generations. Ancient Egyptian priests once organized entire temples around this convergence. Indigenous navigators once charted oceans by the same star's return, and today, millions of people, largely unaware of one another, are each choosing to meet this date with some measure of intention, continuing a thread of collective attention that stretches back further than recorded history. It's worth noting that this pattern of collective simultaneous attention around significant astronomical moments isn't unique to the Lion's Gate specifically. Solstices, equinoxes, and other major celestial events have drawn similar collective focus across countless cultures throughout history, each tradition developing its own specific rituals and meanings around shared cosmic timing. What makes the Lion's Gate distinct within this broader pattern is its particular combination of astronomical rarity, numerological resonance, and modern spiritual community adoption, converging into a single date that continues drawing genuine widespread attention, even in an age when most people no longer track celestial movements as a matter of daily survival the way ancient civilizations once did. Whatever your own experience of today has been, know that you've joined something considerably larger than a single video, a single ritual, or a single moment of personal reflection. As today moves toward its close, consider what you'd like to carry forward from this particular Lion's Gate, understanding that its rarity, this specific 888 convergence, will repeat again in quite this same configuration. That rarity doesn't diminish in significance once today ends. If anything, it deserves continued attention in the days and weeks ahead as you watch which intentions set today begin quietly taking root in your actual life. Whatever you wrote, whatever you spoke aloud, whatever you simply noticed today, return to it periodically in the coming weeks. Notice what begins shifting, what opportunities arise, what clarity continues deepening. This ongoing attention, more than any single day's ritual alone, is often where the true value of a threshold like this one ultimately reveals itself. Consider marking your calendar for the upcoming eclipse in 4 days, and again for the new moon in Leo arriving alongside it as natural checkpoints for revisiting whatever you set into motion today. These upcoming dates offer built-in opportunities to reflect on early movement, however subtle, without needing to invent an arbitrary future date for that reflection yourself. The cosmic calendar, in this sense, continues offering you structured moments for return throughout the remainder of this particular season, each one an opportunity to notice, adjust, and continue nurturing whatever you genuinely planted today. If this journey through the Lion's Gate has meant something to you these past several days, I'd love to hear from you one final time. Tell me in the comments what you're carrying forward from this rare 888 year, whatever that looks like for you personally. Your reflections have shaped this space into something genuinely meaningful, a place where thousands of people have walked through this same threshold together, even from entirely different corners of the world. If this series resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe, for what continues to unfold as we move deeper into this remarkable cosmic year together, and share it with someone who might need to understand today's significance as clearly as you now do. Whatever this 888 year continues to reveal in the months ahead, may you meet each unfolding moment with the same genuine presence you've brought to this threshold today. Thank you for walking through this entire threshold with me. From the earliest signs to this exact open gate, whatever you've planted today, may it grow into everything you hoped it would become.